Humans have had a very persistent desire to understand the things around them, as well as to make meaning of it. Many people have risen up to try and explain the world and how we interact with it. In this video, we'll talk about one such thinker, Ferdinand de Saussure. Saussure was a linguist who was interested in a diachronic view of language, or seeing how language evolves over time. With this interest, he pioneered the study known as semiology or semiotics. Semiology is the study of signs and of movement in structuralism. But what is that? When looking at any word, there is a real-world equivalent in the created word that you use to label it. For example, a cat is a fluffy animal that is also an apex predator. The animal itself is the signified, and is what's being brought to mind. The word cat, however, is the signifier. It is the word used to call a cat to mind. The relationship between signifier and the signified, the collective being a sign, is always arbitrary. There is nothing that inherently links the word cat to a cat, outside of our collective agreement as English speakers to call the animal that. Think of it like this. My name is Aaron. Why is my name Aaron? Is it because the word is somehow inherently linked to my being? Does the meaning of Ireland relate to me, besides the fact that I am very white? No, my name was an arbitrary choice by my mother. She could have called me any other name in the world, and that would have had no bearing on me as a person. The tag Aaron is completely arbitrary. While the link between signifier and signified is always arbitrary, it's also based in difference. The word cat holds meaning because it differentiates itself from other not cats. This is a popular idea in existentialism in which an object is defined by what it's not. I am myself because I am no one else. A chair is other because it is not me, and it is a chair because it's not something else. This idea carries over to semiotics because a sign derives meaning from not being another sign. Another topic in semiotics is polysemy. Polysemy is when a signifier can have multiple signified. Polysemy relies on the separate meanings being somewhat related to one another, however. For example, the word healthy. To say someone looks healthy refers to their health as a whole. To say someone is healthy refers to their physical health. To say someone's food is healthy means that it will make a person healthy. The words all have different meanings, but the meanings are all related or stem from the same idea. One form of polysemy comes in metaphors, which will be explored later. Going hand in hand with polysemy is connotation, or the implied negative or positive meaning a word has. For example, the phrase, she is a pretty woman versus she is a hot babe. The latter is more sexist and objectifies the woman. The former brings to mind a movie about a prostitute is nicer. Let's look at the poem, The Forties by Franz Wright. It's only one line, but there's a lot going on that I think Saussure would find interesting. First, there's the signs, the star, the men, the desert, etc. All these words call to mind the real-life equivalents or sound images. I'm sure when reading it, you pictured those things. Now, let's look deeper at the poem. Because of the punctuation, or rather, their lack of, you can read this multiple ways that affects the connotations of the poem. You can either read it as, and in the desert cold, men invented the star. Or you can read it as, and in the desert, cold men invented the star. The first reading of it paints the men as more sympathetic, as they are the ones facing the cold of the desert. The second reading changes the opinion of the men by making them cold, a word that itself is a polyseme. Instead of being physically cold, the men are emotionally cold in the eyes of the speaker. Going further into polysemy, the whole poem is a metaphor. Metaphors work as a vessel for polysemy because it relates the words through meaning, meaning that a signifier ends up working as multiple signified by the implied similarities drawn through the comparison. In the 40s, the star is a metaphor for the atom bomb. Wright compares the atom bomb to a star because they can be seen as visually similar, but also because for Americans, the creation of the atom bomb was seen as a protection of their way of life, something our own star, the sun, has come to mean. But stars can also be destructive. They can go supernova and destroy themselves. Depending on how you read the poem originally, can drastically change the connotation of the star. If you view the men as in the desert cold, or if you view them as sympathetic people, then you might take the first view of the star as a source of life or the status quo. If you read the poem in the second way with the cold men, you might view the star in a more destructive sense. As for the desert, you can either view it literally or metaphorically, also making it a polyseme. The desert could either be the actual desert where the testing for the atom bomb was done, or it could represent the devastation that the bombs would end up causing, destroying lots of life. Breaking down the 40s in this way explores the meaning behind the words and how language forges that meaning. In the end, Saussure's ideas would be extremely important in linguistics, cultural studies, and many other academic pursuits. There would even be pushback against his theories in the form of post-structuralism. And while Saussure's writing is sort of complicated and hard to understand, I do think it is a helpful way to look at how meaning is constructed. Definitely allergic to this hat.